She refused to make a deal with a high-ranking colonel just to stay honest. But the very next day, the military came to her workshop. Subscribe and write where you're watching from. The sharp scent of motor oil and hot metal hit Jessica. Aisha, Morgan's senses as she stepped into her shop before sunrise, the same way it had for nearly 8 years now. The cold, Georgia air hadn't yet caught up to spring's promises, and her breath fogged faintly in front of her face as she unlocked the thick steel doors to Morgan Auto and Diesel. The building wasn't much to look at from the outside, just a long, low metal structure she'd refurbished herself after purchasing it for pennies at a county auction, but inside it was her kingdom. The lift groaned to life, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the radio played low from the break room, already tuned to the old-school R&B station she liked best. She reached for the coffee pot and poured herself a black mug full, the kind of cup you could stand a wrench in, and took a sip before pulling on her gloves. She was a woman who worked with her hands, scarred, strong hands that had held the lives of soldiers together overseas in Iraq, and now held together mufflers, transmissions, and brake systems back home in Fairburn, a small town shadowed by Fort Peyton, Georgia's sprawling Army base. She was 36 years old, 5'8", with a runner's build and the kind of shoulders you only earned under the weight of diesel engines. Her skin, a deep mahogany tone, bore sun-faded patches from years under harsh light, and her eyes, often hidden beneath a pair of wraparound safety glasses, were sharp, quick, and used to being doubted. People rarely expected her to be the owner when they walked into the shop, or the master mechanic, or someone who'd logged more hours under Humvees in a war zone than most men in town had spent behind a desk. That was fine. She didn't need them to accept her. She just needed them to come back after the work was done right. Morgan Auto and Diesel wasn't a big operation, but it had a reputation. Veterans came for the discount and stayed for the honesty. Civilian clients, once skeptical, became loyal after they realized she wouldn't upsell them on parts they didn't need. Her invoices were simple, handwritten or printed on recycled paper, and always explained. Her waiting area had mismatched chairs and an old vending machine that only took quarters. Still, she had a small but reliable team, and for the most part, business was steady. Her right-hand man, Alex Garcia, arrived 15 minutes after she opened. He gave her a nod and a tired smile, holding up a steaming paper bag. "Breakfast burritos, you're welcome." "You're a saint," Aisha said, tossing him a grease rag and taking the bag with the reverence of someone who'd skipped dinner the night before to finish up a late-night brake job. By 8, the other 2 mechanics had rolled in. Kenny, an older white vet with bad knees and worse jokes, and John, a 21-year-old who'd been one call away from juvie before she took him on as an apprentice. And then there was Latifah, their newest recruit, barely 20, with a brain sharp as a socket wrench and a heart full of questions. She idolized Aisha, called her Miss M out of respect, even when Aisha told her to cut it out. That morning passed like most others. Oil changes, diagnostic tests, a stubborn 2009 F-150 with electrical problems. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work, and Aisha loved it. She loved the problem-solving, the rhythm of machines, the peace that came with focusing completely on a task. Her hands were perpetually smudged, her overalls worn at the knees, but her tools were clean, her bay spotless, and her books balanced to the penny. Around 10, a customer walked in, a tall white man in a crisp blazer and expensive loafers that didn't belong anywhere near a garage. He paused at the entrance, letting the door close behind him slowly, like he expected someone to announce his arrival. "Can I help you?" Aisha called, not bothering to remove her gloves. He looked around, confused. "I'm looking for the manager." "That's me," she said. He hesitated. "No, I meant the owner, the lead mechanic." "You're still talking to her," she said, standing straight and wiping her hands on a towel. The pause that followed was too long. "You're the mechanic?" he said finally, disbelief woven into every syllable. "That's right," Aisha said, voice cool. There was a moment of silence before the man laughed awkwardly and gestured to the parking lot. "I've got a Porsche Cayenne out front. Needs a noise checked out. Maybe an alternator." She nodded. "Pop the hood. We'll take a look." He hesitated again, then said, "You know what? Never mind. I'll find another place," and walked out. Aisha didn't flinch, not anymore. She'd had clients try to speak to John instead, others who left and returned later, apologizing after checking Yelp or asking a neighbor. She'd been called sweetheart and darling more times than she could count, and had weathered them all. By lunchtime, she'd mostly forgotten the man's face. She was elbow-deep in a transmission rebuild when a gleaming, black SUV pulled into the lot, slow and deliberate, as if it expected a red carpet. The vehicle bore Defense Fleet Inc. decals and government plates. The driver, a man in his mid-40s, stepped out wearing a button-down shirt, tailored slacks, and a pair of sunglasses that probably cost more than her shop's rent. He surveyed the building like a general assessing a battlefield, and then made his way inside. "Can I help you?" Aisha asked. The man removed his sunglasses with a practiced ease. "I'm looking for the owner." "That's me," she replied. His brow lifted, but he recovered quickly. "Thomas Benning, Defense Fleet. We handle fleet logistics and procurement for Fort Payton. I was told this place came highly recommended." "I appreciate that," Aisha said carefully. "What can we do for you?" "I've got a Recon modified Tahoe in need of some minor work. I need it back by tomorrow morning." Aisha nodded. "We'd need to do a full diagnostic before I can guarantee a turnaround. We're usually on a 48-hour cycle for anything more than routine maintenance." Benning smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "I'm sure you'll find a way. This vehicle's for an on-base demonstration. High-ranking company. You'll want your name attached to it." Something about his tone crawled under her skin. "We don't cut corners," she said. "If something's wrong, it gets fixed right, or it doesn't leave here." Benning's smile faded. "Of course. But I trust you'll prioritize it." "I'll prioritize safety." A beat passed. He studied her a second too long. Then he handed over the keys. "I'm sure you'll do the right thing, Miss Morgan." The moment he left, Aisha felt the tension tighten in her chest. Something about the whole interaction buzzed like a live wire. When she lifted the Tahoe, her suspicions deepened. Several modifications didn't match the OEM specs. The brake lines had aftermarket work, and the ECU had been flashed with a custom program, dangerously unstable if the vehicle was pushed hard. Whoever had touched it last had left it vulnerable to catastrophic failure. She called Benning, told him the truth. The truck needed more than an overnight tweak. It needed repairs she couldn't safely complete in less than 2 days. "That won't work for me," he said sharply. "I need it ready." "It won't be. Not unless you want a death trap." There was a long pause. Then, coldly, "You know, Miss Morgan, people in your position usually understand the value of opportunity when it knocks." She hung up, calmly, quietly, and went back to work. But the knock that followed wouldn't be one of opportunity. It would be the first strike in a storm she didn't yet see coming. By the end of the day, she noticed her Google reviews had dropped. 3 new 1-stars. Vague complaints. Unprofessional. 2 emotional. Not a safe shop. The reviews were barely believable, but the pattern was familiar. She looked at the Tahoe still sitting on the lift, the name Defense Fleet etched on the rear panel like a warning sign. Then she looked down at her hands, calloused, capable, and steady. They had kept soldiers alive in Iraq. They would keep her business alive now, even if she had to fight a different kind of war. By the time Thursday rolled around, the black Tahoe was still up on the lift, and Aisha had barely slept. She'd run every diagnostic twice, documented each irregularity, and made sure the invoices, notes, and part numbers were logged and copied. Something about this vehicle and this man didn't sit right, and her instincts, which had kept her alive overseas and afloat in business, were screaming not to rush, not to bend, not to trust. She stepped out into the cool morning air, coffee in hand, just as Alex pulled up. He spotted the Tahoe still suspended and raised an eyebrow as he got out. "He's still pushing for it?" "He backed off," Aisha said, "for now." Alex studied her for a moment, then glanced toward the shop. "That doesn't sound like a win." "It's not." Inside, the team worked quietly, but there was tension in the air. Kenny had picked up on it too, muttering under his breath as he changed spark plugs on a Corolla. Latifah seemed unusually quiet, sticking close to Aisha's side, like she could sense something was off, even if she didn't fully understand what. Mid-morning, a city inspector arrived. Aisha met him at the bay door, confused. "Perry's the name," he said, flashing an ID. "Fire safety compliance. Got a report about your chemical storage." Aisha blinked. "I wasn't scheduled for another inspection until November." "Someone called in an anonymous complaint. I have to follow up. Just a walkthrough." She nodded and led him around the shop, jaw tight. Everything was in order. Her hazardous waste containers were clearly labeled and stored correctly. The ventilation systems were up to code. Still, the inspector lingered longer than normal, jotting notes, checking expiration labels, testing the eye wash station, inspecting fire extinguishers with deliberate slowness. When he left, he handed her a citation. Minor, but annoying. A faulty pressure gauge on one of the extinguishers. Alex watched him drive off, then turned to Aisha. "That wasn't normal." "No," she said flatly, "it wasn't." The first negative review hit that afternoon. It was anonymous, like most troublemakers prefer. The username was generic, Karga 47, and the comment vague. "Shop seemed unorganized. Owner was rude. Don't trust the quality." 2 stars. Then came another an hour later. Aggressive atmosphere. Woman mechanic didn't seem to know what she was doing. 1 star. By the next morning, there were 3 more. She clicked through each one, noting the identical sentence structure, the sudden influx after months of steady, glowing reviews. It was deliberate, coordinated. Alex came in holding his phone, face tense. "You seeing these?" She nodded, not looking up. "I checked some of the profiles," he said. "New accounts. No review history. This is targeted." "I know." "You think it's him?" "Who else?" She sat back in her chair, mind already sifting through possible next moves. The Tahoe was nearly finished. She'd sourced parts from a trusted veteran-owned supplier out of Tennessee. Slightly more expensive, but guaranteed to meet military specs. She didn't want this repair coming back to bite her. At noon, her phone buzzed with a new voicemail. She stepped outside to listen. It was short. "This is Thomas Benning. Just checking in. I assume the Tahoe's done by now. I'll be there at 3. I trust you've handled it." She stared at the screen for a moment, then deleted the message. When he arrived, right on time, he didn't park. He glided in like he owned the asphalt. Stepping out, he adjusted his sunglasses and greeted her with that same calculated smile. "I assume everything's been handled." "It's ready," Aisha said. "You'll find the full invoice inside the glove compartment, along with the parts report and our labor breakdown." He walked around the vehicle once, running a finger along the edge of the hood like he was appraising livestock. Then he opened the door, retrieved the paperwork, and started flipping through it. $1,800, he said, voice rising, "for a pump and some bushings? Labor, overnight sourcing, and safety inspections," Asha replied evenly. "The custom work someone else did nearly compromised the whole front-end system." "This is robbery," he snapped. "You've padded this. You think I don't know what these parts cost? They're listed, along with our supplier's documentation and markup. We're actually below the regional average. I'm only paying $1,200. Aisha didn't blink. "You're paying the amount on the invoice." He took a step forward, invading her space just enough to test her. "Do you know who I am?" "Yes," she said, "and I still won't change the bill." "I was going to recommend your shop for our base contracts," he said, voice quiet now, dangerous. "That would have been good for you, 80,000 a year, maybe more. But I see now you're not someone who understands how to build relationships." "You mean favors?" "I mean smart business." "Smart business doesn't include shortcuts or intimidation." He smiled coldly, then turned and walked toward Alex at the counter. "If your boss understood the game, she'd be on her way to a second shop by now." Alex didn't reply. His hands were clenched under the counter and his jaw twitched. Benning slapped his card down. "Charge it, but this isn't over." When he was gone, Alex exhaled sharply. "He's gonna come back harder." "I know," Aisha said. "Let him." The next day, the first customer canceled. A military family, regulars, always polite. The wife called, hesitant. "Sorry, Aisha. My husband's command mentioned your shop. Said there were concerns. Safety issues. I don't believe it, but he's under pressure. I hope you understand." She did. She didn't like it, but she understood. By the end of the week, 5 appointments had disappeared. On Monday morning, her bank rep left a message asking for updated financials. The tone was polite, but the implication was clear. Rumors had spread. At lunch, Kenny turned off the radio. "What the hell's going on?" Aisha didn't answer at first. Then she looked up at her team, her shop, her walls, her name on the door. "We're being strangled, quietly, deliberately." Latifah's eyes widened. "Why? You didn't do anything." "I didn't do what he wanted," she said, "and I didn't play along." She spent that night at her desk, alone. The lights off, except for the one over her workstation, casting a yellow glow across stacks of invoices and parts receipts. She watched the Tahoe's repair footage on the security monitor again, every step recorded. She documented it all, timestamps, audio clips, scanned invoices. She started building a file, not out of vengeance, out of necessity. Because if someone was going to burn down what she built, she was going to make damn sure the fire left a trail of ashes leading right back to them. The reviews kept coming. The calls grew colder. One morning, a young soldier who'd never visited the shop before asked her flat out if she was really qualified to work on military-grade vehicles. She stared at him, said nothing, and pointed to the photo on the wall, her in fatigues, standing on a tank in the middle of Iraq, grease on her face and a wrench in her hand. He left without saying another word. At the end of the week, Alex pulled her aside. We've got 2 months, maybe less, before this ship starts to sink." Aisha nodded. "Then we'd better make our move before it does." She opened her laptop and began typing the first lines of what would become a report that shook the walls of Fort Peyton. It started with 6 words. "This isn't about a repair job." And it ended with a name. Thomas Benning. The Monday, after she began assembling the report on Thomas Benning, started much like any other. Aisha arrived at the shop just after 6, hours before most of Fairburn was even awake. The morning air was heavy with humidity, and the clouds were thick with the promise of rain. She liked that kind of weather. Quiet, moody, honest. It matched her mood. She made her usual coffee, checked the invoices from the weekend, and glanced at the week's schedule tacked up on the wall beside her office. Fewer appointments. Still bleeding. She could feel the noose tightening day by day. Latifah came in early. She had that look again, wide eyes, alert posture, eager to prove herself. Aisha saw something of herself in the girl. She wondered if that's what had drawn her in from the start. "I topped off all the fluids on the Bronco," Latifah said, already half covered in grease. "Customers said the transmission was sluggish. You think it's the clutch pack or the solenoid?" Aisha smiled despite herself. "Run the scanner and check the codes. Let me know what you see." "Yes, ma'am." The girl hurried off, and Aisha turned to the Tahoe's repair log, going over it one more time. She was preparing her documentation carefully. Each scanned invoice, time-stamped image, and even clips from the shop's security cameras that showed Benning's attitude, his pressure, and his implications. It had to be tight. Precise. She wasn't just standing up for her name. She was preparing for a war. Just before 9, the bell over the shop door rang. A young white woman stepped inside, looking nervous. She held a folded piece of paper in one hand and her phone in the other. Her clothes were clean but modest, a faded yellow maternity top and jeans with worn knees. Her belly, round and high, showed she was far along, maybe 7 months. "Can I help you?" Aisha asked, wiping her hands. The woman hesitated. "Are you Miss Morgan?" "Yes." "My name's Jenna Richards. My husband is stationed over at Fort Peyton. He's not here right now. He's deployed. I heard about your shop through a friend and, well, I really didn't want to bring this to the dealership. They quoted me almost $6,000 just to look at it." Aisha gestured toward the parking lot. "What are you driving?" "Chevy Suburban, 2019. It's idling rough, and there's this horrible grinding sound when I brake, and when I steer, and when I don't steer." Aisha smiled. "Let's take a look." They stepped outside together. The Suburban was a beast, matte black with military tags and subtle aftermarket details. It didn't take more than 2 seconds for Aisha to spot the same pattern. "Where'd you get this modified?" Jenna blinked. "Modified? These brake calipers aren't stock, and your intake's been swapped." I didn't do any of that. We got it through my husband's CO's contact. Defense Fleet. They gave us a military family deal." Aisha said nothing at first, just nodded and told her to leave the keys. As soon as the Suburban was up on the lift, she saw it all. The aftermarket mods weren't just shoddy, they were dangerous. The ABS system had been partially bypassed, likely to reduce cost on installation. The brake lines were connected using cheap aluminum fittings that would crimp and rupture under sustained pressure. The power steering system had been flashed with a custom tune that forced the pump to overwork itself. Even more chilling, several OEM tags had been removed or replaced with counterfeit barcodes. Someone had gone through considerable effort to mask the origin of the components. Alex stood beside her as she pointed out each flaw. "This isn't a fluke," she said quietly. "This is a pattern." He frowned. This could have failed at highway speed. With her in that condition, it could have killed her and the baby. Latifah hovered nearby, silent, absorbing every word. Aisha documented everything: photos, parts, numbers, notes on the wear patterns. She even took samples from the fluid reservoirs to send to a lab. She'd learned that much from her military years. If you were going to blow a whistle, you did it with evidence so loud they couldn't pretend not to hear it. She called Jenna back into the shop and showed her the printouts and photos. "This isn't your fault," Aisha said gently, "but this car isn't safe. Not for you, not for anyone." Jenna looked at the photos, tears welling in her eyes. We trusted them. We thought because it was military approved." "I know," Aisha said, "but it wasn't." Jenna wiped her face and took a breath. "Can you fix it? I'll give you the military family discount, and I'll set up a payment plan. But I'm not letting you leave in that thing until it's safe." 2 days later, the work was done. Jenna's Suburban purred like it had just rolled off the line. Aisha even detailed it herself, a gesture that hadn't been asked for but felt necessary. Jenna returned with a tray of muffins and a shaky smile. "I didn't know what else to bring. Thank you." But that night, the cost of her kindness showed up in the form of a phone call. It was Jenna again, crying. "He found out," she said. "Colonel Benning, my husband's CO. I didn't know. He saw the invoice when I sent it to James to show him the payment plan. He said you do substandard work, that you're dangerous. He told James I'd put our family at risk." Aisha closed her eyes. "We can't afford another repair," Jenna continued, "and I know what you did was right. But James is terrified. He's already under pressure. He thinks this could affect his career. I'm sorry." "You don't owe me an apology," Aisha said. "You owe yourself safety." Jenna sniffled on the other end of the line. "I just don't know what to do." Aisha sat alone in her office for a long time after the call ended. The shop had closed, the lights were off in the garage, the soft ticking of the cooling machinery the only sound. Outside, rain finally started to fall. She stared at her ledger. 5 more cancellations. A denied request from the parts supplier for extended terms. A late notice from the bank. The numbers were getting ugly. She had maybe 10 weeks at most. She considered what it would mean to let it all go. Close the shop, take a desk job, hide, start over somewhere else, where her face didn't get her second-guessed before she spoke, where her skin didn't threaten egos, where being a woman in a man's trade didn't mean a daily fight to justify her place. But the thought of silence filled her with more dread than failure ever had. Her laptop was still open. She reached over and opened the folder she'd been building. Benning Evidence. She clicked on the footage from Jenna's repair. The security camera showed Jenna's face, worried, tired, trusting, and it showed Aisha's hands, steady, competent, unflinching. The screen showed the truth, and that's when she realized the truth was enough if she was brave enough to let it speak for her. She began organizing everything, creating a timeline, invoices, names, phone calls, email threads, audio files from her voicemail, video stills, side-by-side comparisons of Defense Fleet pricing versus legitimate suppliers, quotes from reviews that were suspiciously similar, patterns of speech, same grammar, same words, different names. The further she dug, the clearer it became. This wasn't personal pettiness. This was systemic fraud. She reached out to a contact she hadn't spoken to in years, Captain Lauren Pike, now working with the Inspector General's office, someone she'd met during her second tour. Her message was short. I have something you need to see, and if I'm right, it's not just my business on the line, it's lives. She clicked send. Then she sat back in her chair, the rain still drumming on the metal roof, and waited for morning. It started slowly, as retaliation often does. Not with fireworks, but with subtle shifts that you might miss if you weren't already watching the shadows. The morning after Aisha submitted her first files to Captain Lauren Pike, she found a small dent on the passenger side of her truck. She didn't remember it being there the night before. A hit and run, maybe. Nothing major. The security cameras facing the parking lot had mysteriously lost signal between midnight and 3 a.m. Alex reviewed the footage frame by frame, jaw tight, eyes narrowed. I don't like it, he said finally. First the reviews, then the cancellations. Now this? It's a warning, Aisha replied quietly. Not loud enough to report, just loud enough to be heard. The next day, a man she didn't recognize pulled into the lot and asked for a quick oil change. He looked like any other customer. Ball cap, polite smile, wallet out. Aisha was in the bay helping Latifah with a radiator flush when the shouting began. The man was yelling at Kenny at the front desk, accusing the shop of scratching his car, of stealing his change, of breaking his air filter. The claims were wild and inconsistent. The other customers in the waiting area looked uncomfortable. Aisha wiped her hands, walked inside, and calmly asked the man to leave. He demanded the police be called. She offered to do it herself. That was enough for him to back off. He got into his car and drove off without another word. 2 hours later, a 1-star review appeared. Aggressive environment. Owner threatened me. Shop felt unsafe. Alex read it aloud and then threw his phone on the workbench. They're trying to bait you. I know. They want you angry. They'll have to try harder. But even Aisha's resolve wasn't made of steel. By the end of the week, she'd lost 3 more clients. A local parts distributor she'd worked with for 5 years suddenly announced they would no longer be able to extend credit. Her monthly parts order, already trimmed to the bone, had to be paid up front. The bank, now more cautious, sent a letter requesting updated financial documentation. At night, Aisha sat in her office staring at spreadsheets, recalculating survival. They were running lean, barely enough to cover payroll, rent, and utilities. The new equipment she'd purchased with the expansion loan, state-of-the-art lifts, diagnostic systems, tools, now felt like anchors pulling her into deeper water. Her loan payments were non-negotiable, her interest rate fixed, her collateral the very building she now feared losing. Still, she pressed on. She reviewed the evidence file a dozen more times, refining it, updating it, adding anything that might be useful. She created a second copy on a password-protected flash drive and handed it to Alex with simple instructions. If something happens to me, give this to Captain Pike. No delays. He didn't laugh. He just nodded and slipped it into his locker. That weekend, she went to a local community meetup for small business owners. She had attended in past years, always quietly, usually on the edges. This time she brought printouts, comparative data between her pricing and defense fleets, screenshots of duplicated online reviews, a breakdown of faulty vehicle inspections. When it came her turn to speak, she stood before the small group of mostly middle-aged white business owners and told them the truth. Not in anger, not in desperation, just the facts. Some of you know me, some of you don't. I've been a mechanic here for 8 years. I've never missed a tax payment, never had a single safety complaint. But in the last 2 months, I've lost 30% of my business. Not because I did anything wrong, but because I refused to let a government contractor intimidate me into cutting corners. And now he's using his connections to destroy me, one star at a time. The room was quiet. A few eyes met hers. Most didn't. Afterwards, a woman from a nearby landscaping company approached her. "My brother's in procurement," she said cautiously. "He told me to steer clear of you. Said there's talk on base." Aisha raised an eyebrow. "He didn't believe it," the woman added quickly, "but that's how fast these things spread. Just wanted you to know." Aisha thanked her. Then she drove home, heart heavy. Even the people who didn't believe the lies still carried them. That was how rumor worked, like rust, invisible until it was too late. Back at the shop, Latifah met her with a hesitant look. "Can I talk to you?" "Always." The young woman twisted her fingers, hesitant. "I saw your face after that guy today, and the scratches on your truck, and the article." Aisha turned slowly. "What article?" Latifah pulled out her phone and showed her the local paper's website. There it was, a piece in the Business Watch column featuring anonymous sources questioning the stability and management of Morgan Auto and Diesel. It included quotes from online reviews, verbatim. The article didn't say her name outright, but it didn't have to. It referenced a minority-owned business near Fort Payton with recent customer safety concerns, and noted that military families are advised to use certified vendors. Aisha read the piece twice, then closed the browser and handed the phone back. "They didn't even talk to me," she said. Latifah's eyes welled. "What are you going to do?" Aisha looked around her shop, at the tools she'd bought with deployment money, at the old lift in the corner that still had a dent from when she dropped her first engine, at the faded Army unit patch hanging on the wall next to a photo of her dad. Then she looked at Latifah, barely out of high school, already strong, already watching her mentor fight a battle she hadn't signed up for. "I'm going to finish what I started." On Monday morning, Aisha drafted a transparency policy. It detailed how every invoice at her shop would now include a breakdown of parts cost, supplier markup, labor rates, and a side-by-side comparison to local dealerships. She printed copies and placed them at the counter, posted one in the waiting area, and uploaded it to her website. Then she emailed it directly to her client list, over 200 names. The subject line read, "Honest work, open books." Responses trickled in. Some thanked her, some ignored it, but a few stood out. Military spouses, retired vets, people she'd worked with for years, and then an unexpected message from Jenna Richards. "James saw the file. He's furious. Not at you, at them. He talked to another soldier who had the same vehicle problems. We're spreading the word. Quietly, but it's happening. Thank you for fighting. You're not alone." That night, Alex showed her the reviews. New ones, 5-star, written with detail and appreciation. Some were from recent clients, others from years past. "She saved me $1,000, one wrote. "Didn't even charge me for labor when she saw I was out of work. I bring my mom's car here, and I'll bring my daughter's car when she starts driving. I don't know what's going on, but this woman is the real deal." It wasn't enough to reverse the damage, not yet, but it was a start. Then, 3 days later, Sergeant Michael E. Daniels walked through the garage doors, clean-cut, Army fatigues still sharp despite his off-duty hours. He looked uncomfortable, embarrassed. "I heard what's happening," he said. "I can't say much, but I can show you this." He handed her a folded piece of paper, a maintenance invoice from Fort Payton's motor pool. A vehicle had been serviced by Precision Auto Care for over $6,000 in brake system repairs. Aisha read it, then reread it. The part numbers, the labor time, the signature. "Robert Benning," she said aloud. "The colonel's brother," Daniels confirmed. "I figured you'd want to know." Aisha exhaled slowly. The dots weren't just connecting, they were spelling out a map. She added the invoice to her growing file. Tomorrow she would finalize her formal complaint to the Inspector General. But for now she stepped outside into the evening air, lifted her eyes to the darkening sky, and allowed herself a single breath of hope. She wasn't done yet. She was just getting started. The complaint to the Inspector General's office was sent at precisely 9:02 a.m. on a Friday. It was 36 pages long, not including attachments. Every invoice, photo, security video still, voicemail transcript, and testimonial meticulously ordered and annotated. Aisha reviewed the document 3 times before pressing send, her pulse steady, her breath calm. It was the most dangerous thing she had ever done outside of a war zone, and she had done it with the same deliberate discipline that had carried her through 2 combat deployments. Afterwards, she sat alone in her office, not saying a word, just staring at the laptop screen as the message sent confirmation glowed back at her. The rain had returned that morning, soft and persistent, tapping gently on the metal roof of the shop. Outside, the lot was nearly empty. 3 appointments had canceled within the past 48 hours, citing scheduling conflicts, though Aisha had learned to read between the lines. She felt the weight of it all closing in on her again, less like a wall, more like a slow sinking. But this time she had chosen to fight from the middle of it rather than from the edge. That same afternoon, a black BMW pulled into the shop, sleek and spotless despite the drizzle. Aisha didn't recognize the driver, but the moment the man stepped out, her instincts stirred. He was tall, lean, and polished, his gray suit tailored like it was sewn onto him, his face unreadable behind designer glasses. He didn't look like someone who needed a brake pad replacement. "I'm looking for Aisha Morgan," he said, voice polite, low, and practiced. "You found her," she answered, brushing her gloves off on a towel. He offered a brief smile that didn't touch his eyes. "I represent a group of independent contractors and fleet logistics providers. We'd like to discuss some options regarding future cooperation." She stared at him for a beat, then crossed her arms. "You're with Defense Fleet?" "No," he said quickly, "but I am familiar with them." "What kind of options?" "Let's call it a reset," he said. "We understand there may have been misunderstandings. Our industry relies on relationships, trust, discretion. We'd like to avoid messy escalations." "And if I don't want a reset?" He took a small business card from his wallet and placed it on the counter. "Then I hope you're prepared to deal with the consequences of ongoing reputational deterioration. It's not personal, Miss Morgan. It's just the cost of being inflexible." Aisha didn't pick up the card. She didn't need to. "You can leave now," she said. He waited a moment longer, as if testing her resolve, then gave a slow nod and returned to his car. The BMW purred as it pulled out, and for the next few minutes, Aisha stood motionless, watching the water stream down the shop windows in steady rivulets. By the end of the week, it escalated again. A flat tire on Kenny's car after his shift, nail embedded at an unnatural angle. A delivery truck supposedly scheduled with new hydraulic hoses never arrived, and the supplier claimed the order had been canceled by someone impersonating the shop manager. A Facebook ad she had never authorized began circulating with a poorly photoshopped image of her shop, the words "unsafe" and "unqualified" scrawled in bold red letters. Latifah found the ad first. She brought her phone to Aisha with tears in her eyes. "They're saying you hurt military families," she whispered. "They're saying you put lives at risk." Aisha took the phone, stared at the image, and said nothing. She didn't flinch, didn't even frown. "I'm so sorry," Latifah whispered again. "You have nothing to be sorry for," Aisha replied softly. "I've known who I was fighting since the first day he walked through my doors." That night, Alex stayed late to help her close. He didn't say much at first, just cleaned tools, tightened bolts on the air compressor, went about the rhythm of the shop like it was his own form of prayer. But before leaving, he came into her office, his cap in one hand and his jacket in the other. "I had a buddy who worked at the Peyton Logistics office. Got laid off 2 years ago after he flagged some billing inconsistencies. Told me later he thought someone up the chain was laundering funds through repair contracts." Aisha looked up. "You never told me that." "Didn't think it mattered until now." "Does your buddy have proof?" "Maybe. He said they buried it, but I can ask." "Do it." She worked all weekend on the file, updating everything with the new incidents, the harassment, the fake ad, the canceled parts order. She added the business card left by the man in the suit. She cross-referenced each review and tracked multiple accounts back to the same IP range using a friend in cybersecurity. All of it pointed to a smear campaign, and all of it could now be tied, directly or indirectly, to Thomas Benning and the contracting network he had his fingers in. By Monday morning, she had received her first formal response from the Inspector General's office. The email was brief, but powerful. "Miss Morgan, your submission has been received and forwarded to our investigations unit. We may be in touch for follow-up. In the meantime, please retain all relevant documentation. This matter is being taken seriously." It wasn't much, but it was enough. She printed the email and pinned it to the corkboard in the break room. Let everyone see it. Let them know the silence had finally been broken. A few hours later, she stepped into the garage after finishing a call when she heard the shouting. It came from the front. When she rounded the corner, Thomas Benning himself was standing inside the front desk area, face flushed with rage, rain dripping from his overcoat. His voice filled the space like a thunderclap. "You filed a complaint against me?" he yelled. Customers turned. Alex froze mid-sentence. Latifah stood like a statue near the back wall, jaw slightly parted. Aisha approached slowly, her boots quiet on the concrete floor. "I filed a report with evidence," she said evenly. "The Army will decide what to do." "You have no idea who you're messing with," Benning spat. "I have friends in offices you've never even heard of. Your little garage won't make it to the end of the month." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't blink. "Is that a threat, sir?" she asked, loud enough for the security cameras to catch every word. He took a step forward, then stopped. His eyes flicked toward the wall where the camera was mounted, the red light blinking steadily. "It's a prediction," he sneered, then adjusted his coat. "You think anyone will believe you over me? Over my contracts? Over my history?" "I don't need them to believe me," she said. "I just need them to read." Benning turned on his heel and stormed out. That night, she received another email, this time from Captain Pike directly. "We've reviewed the materials. We'd like to schedule an in-person meeting at Fort Peyton. Preliminary findings suggest your concerns are valid. Please confirm availability." The next morning, she confirmed. When she arrived at Fort Peyton's administration building 2 days later, she was greeted not only by Captain Pike, but also by a second officer, Major Kenneth Ward, and a civilian representative from the Army's Contract Oversight Bureau. They sat together in a small conference room, the walls lined with legal binders and the hum of the AC loud in the silence. Captain Pike gestured to the chair. "Thank you for coming, Miss Morgan." "Thank you for listening." Major Ward opened a thick file. "We've spoken to several families you serviced," he said, "including Mrs. Richards. We've reviewed your documentation. We've compared the costs submitted by Defense Fleet and Precision Auto Care. There are discrepancies and a pattern." The civilian rep nodded. "We believe your allegations may extend beyond Fort Peyton." Aisha's hands stayed steady in her lap. She had prepared for this, not the scale, perhaps, but the moment. "If they're willing to let bad repairs go out to soldiers' families," she said quietly, "they're willing to do worse." The major closed the folder. "We'll be contacting you again soon. Please do not engage further with Mr. Bennon." "I won't." She left the building with the wind behind her, the sky just beginning to clear. As she stepped out into the sun, a phrase from basic training echoed in her mind, spoken by a drill sergeant she'd hated at the time, but respected ever since. "When they start to fear your name, you've already won half the war." By the time Aisha returned from Fort Peyton, her muscles were tight with the kind of tension she hadn't felt in years. Not the panic of uncertainty, but the weight of anticipation. It reminded her of the hours before a convoy rolled out in Iraq, when she would double-check every bolt and bracket, knowing that one missed detail could mean the difference between coming home and not. She'd walked into that meeting expecting skepticism or polite dismissal, and instead she'd found validation. Quiet, professional, carefully phrased, but real. Captain Pike had been direct but respectful. Major Ward had asked tough questions, but not to undermine her. He'd wanted clarity, not justification. And the civilian investigator, who introduced herself only as Miss Brennan from the Army's Contract Oversight Bureau, had taken pages of notes without once interrupting. They weren't just listening. They were building something. Aisha could feel it in the way they leaned forward when she spoke, the way they nodded when she showed them documents they hadn't yet seen. They weren't humoring her. They were confirming what they already suspected. Still, she knew enough to temper hope with realism. Bureaucracies didn't move fast unless they were forced. Evidence mattered. But pressure? Pressure was what cracked concrete. Back at the shop, the mood had shifted. Her crew walked lighter, shoulders a little straighter. Latifah smiled more. Even Kenny, who usually limited his emotional range to grumbling and nodding, had slapped a hand against the side of a car with something close to pride when a returning customer asked if the boss was the one who stood up to the Army. Aisha didn't say anything about it. She didn't have to. She knew they had all seen the change, the subtle lift in the silence. Even the air in the garage smelled less like defeat. But the war wasn't over. Not yet. 3 days later, the shop received an unannounced visit from a city code enforcement officer. This one was new, a young white man with a nervous smile and a clipboard too clean to have seen much use. He was polite, apologetic even, but the inspection he conducted was thorough to the point of harassment. He measured the distance between exit signs, asked for fire extinguisher certifications, tested the water temperature in the break room sink. When Aisha asked if something had triggered the inspection, he avoided her eyes. "Just following a rotation, ma'am," he mumbled. She knew better. The pressure hadn't stopped. If anything, it had intensified. She made copies of the inspection notes and sent them to Captain Pike with a brief email. "This arrived 3 days after our meeting. I trust the timing is not coincidental." The response came less than an hour later. "Thank you, you're right. Please keep documentation of any further attempts at retaliation. We've escalated the investigation. You may be contacted again soon." The following Monday, it happened. Aisha received a call from a blocked number. When she answered, a firm, female voice on the other end identified herself as Major Caroline Hayes from the Department of the Army Inspector General. She requested that Aisha present herself the next morning at Fort Peyton headquarters for a formal session involving senior personnel. The tone was unmistakable. This wasn't a follow-up. This was an escalation. At precisely 0900 hours, Aisha stepped into the administration building once again, dressed in clean work pants, a dark blue shirt with her name embroidered above the pocket, and steel-toed boots she had polished the night before. She didn't wear makeup, didn't soften her look. She came as who she was, a mechanic, a veteran, and someone who had spent her entire adult life earning every inch of ground beneath her feet. This time, she was led past the usual conference rooms and down a quieter corridor lined with closed doors and framed flags. At the end of the hall, a receptionist opened a door and gestured her inside. The room was larger than the one from her previous meeting, with a polished mahogany table stretching nearly the length of it. Seated at the far end was a man she immediately recognized from public military events, Brigadier General Thomas Hayes. Tall, white, with salt and pepper hair and a face that looked carved from granite. Next to him sat Major Ward, Captain Pike, and two civilians in gray suits who introduced themselves only by last name, Feldman and Ruiz from the Army Audit Agency. Across from them sat Thomas Benning. His posture was tight, controlled. He wore a fresh suit, no tie, and the same expression she had seen that day in her shop, the face of a man unused to being challenged. "Miss Morgan," General Hayes said, motioning to a seat across from him, not next to Benning, but at an angle. "Thank you for coming. Please have a seat." Aisha sat, folded her hands calmly in her lap, waited. "We've conducted a thorough review of your documentation," the general began. "We've also performed an internal audit of contracts issued to Defense Fleet, Inc. and its subsidiary vendors over the past 18 months. What we've found has raised serious concerns." Feldman opened a folder and began reading from a summary. Over $145,000 in overbilling across multiple invoices. Duplicate service entries. Inflated parts costs. And, most notably, an unusual concentration of contract awards funneled to one vendor, Precision Auto Care, owned and operated by Robert Benning, Thomas's brother. Aisha didn't move, didn't speak. She knew better than to interrupt. Let the weight of their words fill the room. Captain Pike spoke next. "We also interviewed multiple military families who brought their vehicles to your shop. Their testimonies support your claim that a smear campaign was conducted to damage your reputation after you refused to give preferential treatment." Major Ward added, "We've identified online reviews linked to accounts traced back to known Defense Fleet IP ranges. Several of the reviews used identical phrasing. We believe this constitutes coordinated defamation." The general turned to her. "Miss Morgan, on behalf of the United States Army, I want to thank you for your courage in bringing these matters forward. Your evidence was instrumental in uncovering this scheme. Had it continued, it might have endangered not only military families, but operational readiness across several transportation units." He slid a new folder across the table to her. "This is a request for proposal, RFP, for vehicle maintenance contracts related to Fort Peyton and its affiliated outreach centers. It has been redesigned to allow for the participation of small, independent vendors. We strongly encourage you to submit a bid." Aisha opened the folder. Inside was a clean contract template. Fair terms, transparent language, no hidden clauses. Benning shifted in his seat. His jaw tightened. "This is absurd," he said suddenly. "You're taking her word over mine? Over a contractor who's brought this base 3 years of efficient fleet support? You're relieved of all procurement-related duties effective immediately," General Hayes said sharply without turning to look at him. "Further administrative actions are pending the outcome of a full review. Should criminal charges be warranted, they will be pursued through the appropriate channels." Benning opened his mouth to protest, but then his gaze fell to the 2 civilians at the table. Their expressions were blank. He closed his mouth. "You can't be serious," he muttered. "We are," the general replied. "You may step outside. Your counsel will be in touch." Benning stood stiffly and walked out. The door clicked shut behind him. A silence settled over the room, heavy but not oppressive. "We will follow up with all vendors impacted by this scheme," Captain Pike said. "If you're willing, we may request your testimony in future proceedings." Aisha nodded once. "I'll be there." The meeting ended 10 minutes later, but Aisha didn't walk out. She stood in the hallway for a moment, her back against the wall, breathing deeply. Outside, the sun was breaking through the clouds, casting slanted beams of light across the parade grounds. She didn't smile, but her jaw unclenched. That evening, back at the shop, her crew was waiting for her. Alex had brought barbecue. Kenny had cleaned the shop floor. Latifah had rearranged the tool racks with military precision. "You good?" Alex asked. Aisha set the folder on the counter. "They offered us a contract," she said simply. Cheers erupted around her. Kenny slapped a rag against the workbench. "Hell yes." Latifah hugged her without asking. Aisha let the moment hang there. Let it exist. Not as victory, but as proof that truth, when wielded with care, could still cut through power. She didn't need anyone to fear her name. She only needed them to respect it. 6 months had passed since that last meeting at Fort Peyton. In the time since, the seasons had shifted. The air in Georgia had turned warm and thick with the scent of bloomin' magnolias, and the hum of traffic outside Morgan Auto and Diesel blended with the steady rhythm of pneumatic tools and the occasional low boom of bass from passing cars. The shop had survived. Not just survived, it had grown. What began as a slow trickle of restored trust became a steady current of new business. The base contract, now officially awarded and signed, had been divided into 3 segments to allow smaller independent shops a chance to participate. Aisha's shop secured one of them, all non-combat administrative and personnel vehicles attached to Fort Peyton's Family Services Division. It was manageable, fair, and, most importantly, ethical. No middlemen, no favors, no under-the-table handshakes. With the contract came stability. Real, tangible stability, enough to hire 2 new full-time mechanics. One of them was James Richards, Jenna's husband, recently returned from deployment, who shook Aisha's hand on his first day and thanked her for protecting his family when he couldn't. The other was a young woman named Brielle, fresh out of trade school, the second female wrench-turner in the shop besides Latifah, who now operated confidently at her own bay, her coveralls stained and her smile constant. Alex had officially become her business partner. They shared decision-making now, and he handled the bulk of administrative work that once kept Aisha in the office well past closing. She trusted him with her books, her staff, and her time. Kenny had decided to stay on longer, even though retirement had loomed on the horizon, claiming he wanted to make sure the new kids didn't blow themselves up. The atmosphere in the shop was different now, lighter, A current of pride ran through the place, invisible but ever present. Customers brought donuts again. Veterans dropped by just to check in. Some brought their kids. Others, their stories. The name on the building remained the same, Morgan Auto and Diesel, but beneath it, a new phrase had been painted in bold white lettering across the blue wall: Integrity First. A slogan, maybe, but also a declaration, a reminder, a lesson learned the hard way and carried like a badge. One morning, just before the shop opened, a black SUV pulled into the lot. Not a military vehicle, not a contractor, just a private car with tinted windows and no decals. Aisha was sweeping the front entrance when the door opened and a man stepped out. He was tall, white, with silvering hair and a weathered face. She recognized him instantly. Robert Benning. He stood awkwardly at the edge of the sidewalk, a paper envelope in his hand. "Miss Morgan," he said, voice soft. Aisha didn't move, didn't invite him in. "I'm not here to argue," he added, "or to defend anything. I'm here to apologize." She raised an eyebrow but said nothing. "I didn't know what my brother was doing at first," he continued. "By the time I did, I was too deep in it. He made the numbers, he approved the work. I just signed and cashed the checks." "You didn't question them?" she asked flatly. "I did, once. He told me to mind my own end, and I did. That's on me." He handed her the envelope. She opened it carefully, wary of tricks, but inside were photocopies of old invoices, receipts, and a handwritten note. "I'm shutting the company down," Robert said. "I've already contacted the Army to begin restitution. I'm not trying to win anything back, just trying to walk away the right way." She folded the envelope and tucked it under her arm. "Then do it quietly." He nodded. "I will." When he left, she stood outside for several long minutes, the wind catching the edge of the envelope, lifting it like a fragile wing. She didn't feel satisfaction, just finality. Some victories weren't meant to be celebrated. They were simply endured. A week later, a letter arrived in a cream-colored envelope stamped with the Department of Defense seal. She opened it at her desk while Alex and Latifah were calibrating a new lift. Inside was a formal invitation. Aisha Morgan was requested to speak as a guest at the upcoming Small Business and Ethics and Procurement Seminar hosted at Fort Payton's Leadership Hall. The letter was signed by Brigadier General Hayes himself. At first, she considered declining. Speeches weren't her style. She preferred tools to microphones. But then she thought of Latifah, of Brielle, of the customers who walked back into her shop despite the rumors, despite the noise. She thought of James and Jenna and the baby who had been born just a few weeks ago, healthy and loud. She thought of the weight she had carried and how much lighter it would be if shared. She accepted. The seminar was modest, attended by about 50 people, local vendors, base personnel, and a few auditors from surrounding states. Aisha sat in the second row, her shoulders squared, her work shirt ironed flat for the first time in a month. When it came time for her to speak, General Hayes himself introduced her. "Miss Morgan's experience," he said, "has led to significant reforms in how this base approaches procurement, vendor diversity, and accountability. She did not seek recognition. She sought the truth, and because of that, she has our respect." Aisha stepped to the podium, eyes steady, voice even. She spoke plainly. About ethics, yes, but also about fear, about being underestimated, about the toll of holding your ground while everything around you shifts. She told them how easy it would have been to give in, how tempting, and how grateful she was that she hadn't. "I didn't stand up because I was brave," she said near the end. I stood up because I couldn't look the next customer in the eye if I hadn't. And I wanted that customer to be someone's daughter, someone's wife, someone like me. When she stepped down, the applause was not thunderous, but it was genuine. She didn't need anything louder. Later that month, the Fort Peyton Maintenance Annex, the same building where so many of the falsified invoices had passed hands, was quietly renamed. There was no ribbon-cutting ceremony, no press, just a new sign installed in the early hours of a Tuesday morning. It read, Integrity Center. No one said it was for her. No one had to. Back at the shop, business kept moving. Engines still seized, tires still blew, brakes still squeaked, but the air was clearer now, the laughter more frequent, the silence more peaceful. One afternoon, while cleaning out a drawer, Aisha found an old photo of herself in uniform covered in sand, holding a wrench and grinning beside a busted-up Humvee. She smiled at it, remembering not just the moment, but the version of herself who still believed justice was simple. It wasn't, but it was possible. Alex found her staring at the photo and nudged her with a grin. Still miss it? No, she said, but I'm glad I had it. It taught me what kind of battles are worth fighting. He nodded and stepped out into the garage. The door chimed as a new customer walked in. A young woman, barely 20, holding keys and wearing uncertainty on her face. Aisha stepped forward, wiping her hands. Welcome, she said. What can we help you with today? The girl hesitated, then smiled. I heard you're the best. Aisha smiled back, quietly, steadily. We try our best, she said, every day. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more. Want to see how everyday people fight back and win? Check out our other videos next. And if this message deserves to be heard, share this video with someone who needs it.